Good afternoon. Welcome to week 5's lecture in HRM 316 Employee Selection and Staffing. The objective for today, for the assignment for today, not including the forum discussions, is to prepare a chart with narrative describing the key parts of the selection process. It's critical to understand the pieces of this process because we need to know how we go about after we have created and gotten a pool of qualified candidates, which steps we go, the importance of these steps, and then making sure that by using them, by following them, we're going to select the best candidate possible. Remember that selection is not any more costly, I don't believe, in the entire process of finding a new employee, assuming we're going from outside the corporation. But certainly failure at this point is something that is really to be discouraged. So we're also going to present, after we're finished with the selection piece, notes on Chapter 13, Staffing System Administration, and the Chapter 14, Evaluating a Staffing System. These are important topics, and a well-rounded grasp of staffing an organization is incomplete without discussing them. The selection chart is, and the process is depicted on page 161 in your text. Selection, as we know, is choosing the best candidate from a pool of qualified candidates, or qualified applicants. They're not applicants until they get to the selection process. Pardon me. And they really don't become candidates until they go through a step or two in the selection process. And you're going to select what you hope is the best person for the open position, or the best people for the open positions. As Stewart and Brown, and their text, the 2009 Human Resource Management Linking Strategy to Practice, say that employee selection is a process that an organization uses. Notice this next phrase, to test and gather pertinent information on job applicants to determine the best qualified. To test. And remember, we've talked about this before. The Supreme Court looks upon much of the selection process as a test. They say that interviews are tests. Of course, we know tests are tests, but we have to be careful about what we do and how we approach this. There are two considerations in the selection process. There are job-based fit and organization-based fit. Now, we've talked about these two concepts before, but they bear repeating. One is to make sure that we get the right person in the right job. The other one is not so much concerned about getting the right person in the right job as it is getting the right person who fits within the culture and espouses the values of the organization. So it's very important that we get this as we want it. And we'll look a little bit about this here in a second. So this just says it a little bit differently. What we're doing is the process of determining who it is that we want to bring into the organization. We're picking someone. We're choosing someone. Well, we use the term selection because it sounds better, and a few of those things. So here are some of the things that an effective selection process provides to the organization. By the way, these slides are from Stewart and Brown's. I think I've mentioned that before in case I haven't, from their text. It can help improve the performance of the organization, but also the practices of HR. And it can help us prevent lots of issues down the road. We're looking for motivated people, and we want them, even if they're the job fit we're going after, we want them to be able to fit within the culture of the organization. And once they do that, when we have, pardon me, that kind of a fit, we see that employee issues such as tardiness, absenteeism, uh, less than good working relationships are reduced, and the motivation tends to be higher. So we besides all that, we're going to reduce our cost of selection, because we're going to be able to select somebody who's going to stay, and we're going to reduce overall costs, and hopefully, by making the right selection, improve efficiency. Now, I'd like to move to one other slide before we move on here just a little bit. And this is, I'm not going to read this slide to you. Again, you've seen this before, the difference between the job-based fit and the organization-based fit. Before we focus on the selection model presented in the text, it's important to address, pardon me, several other selection issues. The first is speed of selection. Normally, a company has advance notice when a vacancy is going to occur. Now, they have that for various and sundry reasons. Somebody might be retiring, somebody might be transferring, or somebody gives notice far enough in advance that a good plan can be in place. This can come from having good career planning as well, and hopefully it does. And then if you do have good career planning, you know, or have a pretty good idea of who you're going to replace the person leaving for whatever reason, leaving his or her position for whatever reason, in place relatively quickly. Now, of course, that causes a ripple effect. And unless you're not going to replace someone further down on the hierarchy or in the hierarchy, then you're going to do some type of recruitment again. But that's a different issue, and we're not going to talk about that. Companies do not always know when an employee may decide to take a position at another firm. That's part of the unknown. First part, we talked about things that we do know, or we at least like to think that we know. If the position is deemed critical to fill, an abbreviated selection process may be used. Now, what do I mean by abbreviated? I think that's really a relatively difficult term to define. I would say abbreviated in this context means that you may not do all of the recruiting that you're going to do and things of that nature. So you may change the recruiting a little bit, target it, or narrow it in some other fashion, target meaning towards certain areas, but narrow your scope, not cast as wide a net. And then we may go through the rest of the selection process a little more quickly than normal. Obviously, there's some dangers to that. If we don't cast the net wide enough, does that mean that we're disadvantaging women and minorities? You have to answer that for yourself. I can't answer that. So what we're talking here mostly in abbreviated things that we would do. I'm repeating myself, I know. We would do a targeted recruitment process. So we were not going out and looking as a large an area as we normally would do. And perhaps, and I emphasize the word perhaps, we would use fewer steps in a selection process. Some steps that we would not negate are background check and reference check and things of that nature. We would probably continue to do drug testing, physical examination if that's required, etc. We might skip screening interviews, for instance. That would probably be the only thing I could think that we would skip. There may be some other ones people would skip. If you're going to target the recruitment effort, and it's only going to go to or at people, or try to attract people that have the requisite skills and education, then you might cut out some other things. You might not do some testing, etc., because you'd have a fairly good idea that you're getting at least a pool of people that you were looking for. But you really have to make up your mind whether or not you want to do that. And this is not something that's going to be done just on the spur of the moment. Something that you really have to look at and say, okay, is this what we want to do? And if we don't want to do it, what is it we do want to do? Another issue in the text presents is the probationary period, which may be used in lieu of employment tests as an evaluation of the employee's skills and abilities. I'm going to come back to this in just a second. 30 days seems to be the normal. I have seen them 90 days. I've not seen any exceed 90 days. Now, there is a possibility that if you were in a labor or the labor union contract, they may specify a time longer than that. I have heard of 180 days. I've not experienced that, but I've heard of 180 days. So that you may have to see what your contract says. During this probationary period, the employee can be terminated for minimal reasons, or be terminated minimal reasons, but for minimal problems. The organization, however, has to clearly state to the employee that he or she is being hired on a conditional basis. And the conditional basis is successfully navigating, my term, the probation period and showing that he or she has the worth and the value that the company needs. It's critical that you tell people that they're on a probationary period, that their employment is conditional. Otherwise, you're liable to wind up in areas and problems that you don't want to be in. I'm going to remove the slides here for a second because I'm not going to use them for a few more minutes. The final issue is that of the quantity and quality of the applicant pool. An organization can be very selective if the pool contains a large number of qualified applicants. It can't be if the pool is small and forces the organization to hire virtually everyone who applies. If the organization is forced into this situation, the selection process is moot because it may show that some or all of those who are selected are or will be poor performers. The text provides a selection equation that states the ratio of applicants, when the ratio of applicants is below 1.0, the company has a pool of more qualified candidates than open positions. If it is greater than 1.0, that ratio, it's just the reverse. So good selection procedures are necessary when the ratio is below 1.0 and of little use when the ratio is above 1.0. You find this on page 163 in the text. Do not confuse this with the information provided pages 75 through 78, which talks about adverse impact. It appears to be, in some cases, similar, but it is not. It is entirely different. We're not talking about adverse impact here. All right. Now let's go through the selection steps as is shown in the text. The first is initial screening. And we already have what we consider as a pool of qualified candidates. And now we're going to do a little more refining on this. And this is, as I like to refer to it, a weeding out step. Many applicants will be eliminated at this step for a variety of reasons, among them incomplete application, not matching a resume, or excuse me, not attaching a resume, and not meeting minimum qualifications. This type of screening is usually accomplished by the folks in HR would be an HR specialist. They may be considered, maybe called HR hiring specialist or something of that nature. Or it can be done by the hiring manager, although not often. The hiring manager doesn't usually get involved in this part of the selection process. This weeding out part, this initial weeding out. The application form must be free of asking for inappropriate information such as race, gender, age, school graduation dates, military discharge status, etc. Now, I'm old enough to remember when that was military discharge status was an essential question asked on most application forms. You would see two things. One is, are you a veteran? Or have you ever been in the military, one way or the other? And the second would be, what was your discharge status? And today, that's no longer applicable. You cannot ask that question. In addition, the application form must be consistent with EEOC guidelines, which you can see figure 8.2 provides a sample of this. Now, there is one thing I do want to talk to you about in that. When you're going through, and you wouldn't necessarily do it in this stage, at least ask, but you could have it on the form and you can ask later. And that question is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? That can be asked. You cannot ask, have you ever been arrested? Because arrest doesn't necessarily mean anything. Somebody could be arrested and then realize that that was the charge didn't fit, or it could be arrested and the case never goes to trial. The case is dropped. So arrested means nothing. Conviction, on the other hand, means something. So you could have that on an employment form, and you could ask that in an interview. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? I worked for a small organization that anybody who was convicted of a felony was automatically excluded from employment. Not so much because we, the organization, would exclude them, but because the people that we worked with, our funders, had that requirement. And therefore we could not hire those folks. A fellow came in to see me one time, had an excellent background, what we were looking for, and I asked him, have you been convicted of a felony? And he said yes. And I said, I can't hire you. I mean, we need to stop the conversation now. And he called me back several days later, and I just told him, I said, no, unless that is expunged from your record, there's nothing I can do about it. Due to legalities, the following information should be included on a job application. The employer has an at-will policy. That is, employment can be terminated at any time by either party. Ivancevich and his Human Resource Management 9th edition, 2004, states that this doctrine, this at-will doctrine, dates from the 19th century and is based on both parties being free agents who enter into an implied, although not written, contract that either can terminate for any reason. The EEOC has specific rules for at-will terminations, and courts have narrowed the scope of this type termination. I'm not going to discuss the issue further except to say it is good practice for organizations to make potential employees aware of this policy. Now, that is very much similar in a way, although not quite the same, to a probationary period. It is different because most of the time people who enter into this at-will would go past a probationary period. And pardon me, I've witnessed these issues personally, and they're never pleasant. At-will. I remember this little organization I worked for after I retired from the Army. we had a person that we let go at will. And, she really admitted that, that it wasn't working out for herself or for the employer. And so we have to be careful about these things. And she was hired before I got there, so I don't have anything to base the employment determination on. Her supervisor terminated. I was there as director of human resources. Drug and alcohol screening has become a huge issue for employers. And you must notify potential employees that they're going to undergo drug and alcohol testing. And if you're going to offer them conditional employment based on successfully passing drug and alcohol testing, that must also be stated. Your employment is conditional upon receipt of satisfactory results of drug and alcohol testing. Physical examinations may be required as is physical testing. Taking and passing a physical test may be necessary as long as it is job related. And again, potential employees have to be notified that this is a requirement, that they have to pass it. I think we've talked before that some of these tests, and we're going to talk about some other ones a little bit later, some of these tests are really of questionable reliability, and some of them only do a good job of predicting who will not be successful on the job, not predicting who will be successful. You have to ask for permission, or you should ask for permission to conduct background and credit investigations. The latter, credit investigations, are routinely used in the financial field. Otherwise, they have to be specifically job related. Finally, a statement notifying employees that any false information is grounds for disqualification or termination after job offer has been extended and accepted. They need to know that. You need to be clear about it. Now, the next part we're going to come to is resume analysis. What I was bringing you in talked about some of the steps, but we needed to make sure that all of those things were told to employees, potential employees, up front. Resume analysis is a critical part of the initial screening. Pardon me. The reviewers are often under the mistaken assumption that all information provided on a resume is accurate. As the text points out, this is an error, and in fact, resumes contain inaccurate and/or blatantly false information. Among them are employment gaps, examples of red flags are employment gaps, taking positions of lesser importance or pay, inappropriate certifications, attendance at obscure colleges, obscure, and poor use of grammar, including spelling mistakes. Now, we know that people are guilty of typos all the time. But today, with the PC that we use, and most PCs, if you use a Word document or something similar, are set up to give a red squiggly line underneath the word that is misspelled. Now, the problem that you have is the computers are not smart enough, pardon me, to pick up a perfectly spelled word that is misused or is inappropriate where you have it. Pardon me. So it's incumbent upon the job applicant to ensure that that resume, now we're not talking about inaccuracies here, we're not talking about inflation or falsehoods, we're talking about factual stuff. It's incumbent upon the applicant to assure that what he or she has on the application form and on the resume is everything is spelled correctly and grammar use is correct. The resume should paint a positive picture of the applicant, detail contributions to previous employers and the community, etc. Be logical, well written, and highlight specifics and not generalities. Using the internet to post a resume presents special problems, so the applicant must be aware of them and take the necessary precautions to ensure the resume will appear in the proper format. Now, Henneman provides the following information about resumes. One of the biggest issues employers face is resume inaccuracies. As we've said, Resume Doctor, an online company that assists applicants in preparation, found that 42.7%, excuse me, of resumes had significant errors, and the background checking agency found 56% of resumes contained a falsehood of some type. Major areas of concern, these are in addition to the ones I've just mentioned: inflated titles, inaccurate dates to gloss over job hopping or employment gaps, a little bit differently than what we said before, so that's filling in a little bit more information. Half-finished titles, inflated education, or purchased degrees. Secondary screening comes next. We've gotten the applicant is now past the initial screening, and we are now into secondary screening, which often includes an interview. And as I like to say here, this is again a ruling out period. The applicant here is interviewed usually by an HR person. Now, we'll go back to the initial screening. There could be an interview at that stage. Normally not, but there could be, depending upon what the company's policy is. And the HR person is going to ask questions that are job related. That is, do you know how to perform? Have you ever operated this type of apparatus? Do you have experience in this position? And do you have the required license or certification to hold this position or be considered for this position? If the applicant is either unable to answer or does not possess the needed requirements, the interview is ended because to continue would be fruitless for both parties. It is possible during this step the interviewer may realize the applicant is not qualified for the open position, but is qualified for another position within the company. Now, as you can see, it is critical that organizations have skilled interviewers at this phase. Otherwise, a good candidate for a different job may be lost. If the applicant considers, if the applicant survives this interview, he or she is sent to the hiring supervisor, where a more in-depth interview is held in this part of secondary screening. There are several other criteria that interviewers use in this screening phase. One is evaluating biographical data and background data provided. Note that one study by Harvey Cook, that's Harvey with Cook, and Tafler, published in the Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology, volume 73 in 2000, pages 103 to 118, state that biodata provided on a resume is a good predictor of success in entry-level positions. Now, what biodata are we talking about here? Company would have perhaps either on the resume or, excuse me, on the application or something else, questions about in college my grade point average was, and then list the grade point average would also have a space to say I did not attend college or I attended college for 2 years or less. In the past 5 years, a number of different jobs I've held, and it would enumerate them. The kind of supervision I like best, very close supervision, open supervision, moderate, whatever. When you're angry, which of the following behaviors often describes your reaction? And then you would list those particular things. Over the past 3 years, how much have you enjoyed doing things like watching television, reading, and things of that nature? And then the last question that's listed here that I have from the Henneman text is, in most ways, is your life close to ideal, yes or no, uncertain, etc. Then you would have it. Now, this would probably only applies to large organizations. And you would have an industrial psychologist score those. Most likely, the industrial psychologist would have helped design the instrument to capture the biodata, and it would have a scoring ratio for the data. Now, remember we said that's a good predictor for entry-level positions. Cascio reported in the Applied Psychology and Personnel Management, second edition, which was published in 1982, pages 192 and 193. One organization stated that college standing, meaning here academic rank, was the single best predictor of employment success. In addition, the academic rank was more critical than the college attended. In other words, how well did you rank in your class or perhaps in your major, as opposed to what college you went to. So what this is saying is that academic standing has a higher correlation value to success on the job than say, oh, well, I did this and I attended Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford or University of Chicago or one of the other outstanding universities in the country. So meaning that the college's rank, which we see these often in, U.S. News and World Report, had no bearing on the future employee's success. Organizations also use what is known as a weighted application blank, WAB, and you will find that in figure 8.3 in your text. Here, years on the job is a variable that predicts success on the job. Variables are also used, and each other variables are also used, and each one is given a weight. These forms should be designed by knowledgeable individuals, most likely an industrial psychologist. There's some debate as to whether or not the WAB is a valuable tool. Employment testing now is the next stage, part of the next phase. Pardon me. Now, once this employee, this prospective employee, I should say, gets past stage 2, he or she is considered a candidate. At least that's what I term them. Other testing, the employment interview is the selection procedure that most job candidates encounter, the employment interview. In this stage, candidates may be interviewed by the hiring manager, a panel, go through assessment tests or assessment centers or other type testing. Assessment centers and assessment tests are geared to gauge a candidate's suitability for the position. A typical assessment center may be something like an in-basket exercise. Here the candidate receives a number of job-related tasks in his or her inbox, and then is tested not only on how quickly he or she provides responses, but on the comprehensiveness and quality of responses. Assessment centers, however, can be expensive to use, and they're not applicable for every job. Assessment centers, as far as I'm concerned, should be reserved for middle management at the least, but certainly for senior management, upper level management, and executive management. We're going to focus here on the selection, on the interview, because it is the most common selection test. Interviews fall into two categories. They're either structured or unstructured. According to Vancevich, research has shown that structured interviews will generally be more valid and reliable than those that are unstructured. We're going to talk a little bit about this in a few seconds. During a structured interview, the interviewer uses a predetermined set of questions that should be job related in most respects. And they've been developed from the job analysis, perhaps the job description, and perhaps related to the job specification as well. And then the structured questions are accompanied by a scoring form. Purpose of the structured interview is to ensure that all candidates are asked the same questions. Now, I want to, point out here that it is not necessary to ask all questions in the same sequence, but it is necessary to make sure that all questions are asked. Now, certainly you'd want to look at what you have and make sure that you're asking proper questions in proper sequence. Every question may not necessarily need to go through sequence, but some will. So you may need to make sure that you're following sequence. It should also remove any concern that women and minorities are disadvantaged during the interview, and it can also assist the organization in case of legal action. All right, now we've seen that slide, and this talks about validity, etc. And here we have to ask, in the selection method, we have to ask a couple of questions. Is the process legal? In other words, we talked about the interview, what questions could be asked, what questions can't be asked. They can't be asked on the application blank, and they can't be asked in the interview. So we need to make sure we're following those procedures. Is it fair? Pardon me, does it treat everybody equally? Now, in this case, if we want to ask a question of whether we ought to use a structured or unstructured interview, and by the way, when we get to, not next week, but the week after, we'll do a little bit more about interview testing. So interviewing, we ought to see here about fairness, that having a structured interview, asking everyone the same questions, is obviously more fair than an unstructured interview. Now, unstructured interviews don't follow any pattern. And somebody may ask a question that just popped into his or her mind, hopefully it's job related, but wasn't asked to somebody else for some reason. And so the fairness could be questioned. This last part is a little difficult to answer because we are the insider, and we're asking for the outsider if he or she sees the process as being fair. We probably won't know that until someone lodges a complaint. Of course, we could ask the question that sort of gets to that issue. You have any questions about the processes we've gone through before? You understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what we're going to use. This just gives us a different picture of what we've talked about. Reliability, validity, utility, is it cost effective, legal and fair, as we mentioned before, and are the applicants going to feel it is acceptable to them? Now, we know we've talked about reliability, we've talked about validity, and I'm going to repeat them this one more time, and maybe I'll do it again when we talk about the interviews in a couple of weeks. Reliability simply means that the test that you're using is going to produce the same or similar results time after time after time after time. Validity simply means that the test is set up to measure what it's supposed to measure. Another reason why we want to use structured interviews. So here we are here again. We talk about three most common things used, methods used. We call them testing, gathering information, interviewing. Gathering information, of course, is going to be done through resumes. It's going to be done through applications, etc. Testing comes in various and sundry colors, which we'll talk about here. Situational judgment test, physical ability test, integrity test. I'm not going to go through each one of these. You can read them. You can think about what they mean to you and understand them in that, pardon me, in that fashion. Drug testing, which we've talked about, and or sample testing through an assessment center or something of that nature. And I don't want to be there because that's talking about something that we're not going to get into here. And now, here's some other issues that I will come back to later, but I want to get back to the testing because we don't see it listed here. And it's one that we should, yes, we do, and I skipped over, I beg your pardon. Cognitive ability testing and personality testing. If you have read the text or you have glanced at the text, page 200, the authors say that personality testing should not be used because it is open to a subjective interpretation, and we have to be careful about that. The Henneman text that I referred to fairly frequently, which is a new text, 2014, Staffing Organizations, 8th edition, state that personality tests were not seen as valid at one time. And that supports exactly what Carruth and Payne say. But they go on to say, current research states that they do produce job performance, or they do predict job performance. And the reason that Henneman says they do this is due to the acceptance of the big 5 personality traits. Now, this has been around, the big 5 personality traits has been around for a number of years. And there are 5 traits, and obviously they can be scored. The 5 are extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness to experience. Well, let's go back and look at those. Extroversion simply means being social, and people are comfortable in developing relationships and things of that nature. Agreeableness is the same, another word for cooperation. People are cooperative. Conscientiousness means the person is dependable. Emotional stability means well-adjusted. And then finally, openness to experience tends to mean that person is curious about what he or she is getting into. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we don't have to pay a lot of attention to this, and that if you're going to use these tests, personality tests, that you might make sure that they're being developed by someone who has expertise in the area, industrial psychologist, and interpreted by someone who has expertise in that area. I would tell you the personality tests have pluses and minuses, and actually that's in the Henneman book. Carruth and Payne only devote a paragraph to personality tests. Henneman devotes quite a number of pages. So they're there, they can be used. I would say use them with caution. The 2 most common structured interview types are the situational interview and the behavioral description interview. The first, the former, situational interview uses questions based on hypothetical situations that candidates might encounter on the job. It seeks to identify whether or not a candidate possesses relevant job knowledge and motivation. Hypothetical situation might involve the following scenario. During a sales presentation, the customer asks you to provide research indicating that your product is superior to that of a competitor. The interviewer asks, how will you answer the customer's question? Situational interview questions relate to past experiences tend to be more valid in predicting future than those about future hypothetical questions. I'm sorry, I didn't read my notes properly here. Let me read that again to you. The situational interview questions relating to past experiences tend to be more valid, and the responses tend to be more valid than those about future hypothetical questions. We come down here, just look at this a little bit. This is talking about gathering biographical data and then, pardon me, interviewing. What we do here, and then the types of interviews, situational and behavioral. And then we'll get to some answers here in just a second. The behavioral description interview, the candidate is asked about actual incidents encountered in previous positions and how they would relate the job under consideration, relate to the job under consideration. Behavioral description interview is based upon the assumption that past experiences are a good predictor of future success. The interviewer might ask something like, tell me about a conflict you encountered in your previous job. How did you resolve the conflict? Was the outcome positive? And if not, how did you react? A concern with employment interviews is that the interviewers may not be consistent and are always subject to personal bias. Such some errors that occur during interviews, or the interviewer talks too much, asks unrelated questions, stereotypes candidates, being influenced by the candidate's nonverbal behaviors, and making first impression error, for first impression bias, it's also called, makes up his or her mind within the first few minutes. Now, one of the dangers with first impression bias is that once that happens and the interviewer has made up his mind or her mind, no candidate that comes after this person has a chance to be successful. While these errors can happen to any interviewer, properly designed training programs can eliminate it. The errors are most often seen in the unstructured format. Regardless, interviewers need training so consistency can be achieved. Then verification is step 4. Take this down for right now. This is very tricky and difficult for the potential employer, not employee, employer. Why? Well, no one gives a reference that he or she thinks will be anything but sterling. Of course, supervisors must be listed. In that case, the potential for negative information increases. I'll give you an example here in a second. Rational people understand that a former supervisor should not lie or provide malicious information about former employees. So many organizations will only state the job seeker worked for company XYZ for a specified time and held this particular job, not even talk about pay. The reason for adopting this stance is to shield the organization by providing the reference from legal action. This has become a contentious issue, and a number of states now provide former employers some immunity for giving good faith information. I said I had something I wanted to pass on, I will, and that is I knew a gentleman who was in the Army. It goes back to when I was stationed in St. Louis, and he was getting ready to retire. and he was trying to find civilian employment at headquarters at U.S. First Army at Fort Meade, Maryland. And so he listed his supervisor. And the story goes, I knew this fellow not well. The story goes that he was about to be hired when the person doing the final check called his supervisor and said, so-and-so listed you as a reference. What can you tell me about him? And the words out of the supervisor's mouth was, I wouldn't hire this guy to do anything. So the moral of that story is, if you're going to put somebody down as a reference, make sure they're going to give you a good reference and not something that happened to this person that I mentioned. And we've come to 521. We're going to do a little bit more in the selection process, but I'd like to take a break now. And since it's probably closer to 522, I ask you to come back at 527. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute break till 527. 527, we're back. We have to know that giving only positive information is not a prudent path for people who are being asked to provide a reference when former employees have a potential job risk or present a potential risk, especially safety. Pointed out in the text, the California Supreme Court held a former employer liable to impose damages when a newly hired employee assaulted a student. Here, the former employee hid damaging information. The text points out ways to assist folks checking references, including training employees how to conduct a reference interview by telephone. Let the candidate know the type of references you prefer. Tell outside recruiting agencies what references you want, and keep references in the loop by sending them follow-up letters and thanking them for providing information. Organizations can go a step further by using professional firms to check public information, such as that from the Department of Motor Vehicles and criminal records to further verify candidates' background. If an organization is going to use this type of tactic, it needs to inform the candidate, preferably in writing. Final decision is the job offer. You must hope that all the homework has been completed and it is thorough, because it's very expensive to hire the wrong person and start the whole process over. Prior to getting to this stage, an organization must decide how to notify candidates that another candidate has been selected for the position. This could be accomplished a number of ways: personal conference, telephone, or by formal letter. Conference is the best method, but it's both costly and time-consuming. It may not be practical due to distance or some other factors, but the conference allows the candidate who was not selected to ask what he or she could do to improve and things of this nature. We don't use that type of notification in the United States very often. Telephone call offers the same opportunities. This method and the personal conference build goodwill for the company and should leave a good impression on the rejected candidate. The final method is by formal letter. It should be addressed to the candidate and set on company letterhead. The letter, however, should be personal in nature and as positive as possible. Rejection postcards have come along in recent years, but they should never, ever, ever be used. Now, we considered how to notify the unsuccessful candidates, but first a job offer must be made, and of course there must be acceptance. And the company has to have a fallback position in case the preferred candidate has decided not to take the job for any number of reasons. So there should be some sort of a rank order system. So you're going to offer the job to candidate 1, he or she declines for whatever reason, then you can go to candidate 2, etc. And it's important that you have confirmation, acceptance from the preferred candidate before you send out rejection letters. A tentative job offer is usually made by telephone and then followed up in writing. Formal letter advises the candidate tentative offer is contingent on satisfactory background check, passing drug and alcohol testing, and a physical if that's required. Once those are complete and the company receives satisfactory results, a formal job offer will be made. So remember, that first one is a tentative job offer, and it's contingent upon passing those things we mentioned. Formal offer will reaffirm the start date, position, salary, and benefits. It's possible that either the company or the candidate might want to negotiate start dates. That happens quite frequently. It happened to me here when I came out. I was supposed to start on a Monday, and I'd already committed to doing something that Monday, and I said, well, it's the following day. Okay, and it was. Postponing a start date may be necessary for any number of reasons. I had a special thing I had to do, and I've already committed to that. Somebody could have some other reason. We don't know. Final piece of the process is what I call employee orientation. It is very important that the employee be oriented not only to the company, but to his or her position. Failure to properly orient a new employee will render the entire selection process I have here as null and void. It will certainly, if not that much, it will certainly make it very shaky, and it might be difficult to get the employee back on the track that you want him or her to be on. That takes us to the end of the interview and selection process. Again, as I said, in a couple of weeks, we'll spend a lot more time on interviewing and go into that in depth, more than we've done tonight. Some will be repeated, I realize, but I think there'll be enough difference that you should pay attention to it, because it is important that we go through this right and get it right, because we're not going to have another chance for the most part. Chapter 13, authors state that human resource administration for an employee begins with his or her hiring, and then follows the employee through his or her career with the organization. The chapter deals with many activities, orientation, personal actions such as promotions, resignations, terminations, and the other ones, downsizing, layoffs, reductions in force, retirement planning, and providing references. I view these as being lumped into two separate groups, and therefore going to present them as depicted here. Orientation. This is just very important, as I sort of ended the last part there. It leaves a lasting impression on the employee, and you want that impression to be positive. So, yes, there's some training involved here. And folks do need to know, the new employee does need to know the employee's policies, rules, and regulations, etc. He or she does need to fill out paperwork. So I always look at the orientation as being two-phased. The first part is orienting the employee to the company and getting him or her to complete the required paperwork. Here you may want to tell some of the stories about the company history, how it was started, things of that nature, what its progress is, et cetera, et cetera. Then, of course, you may want to give the employee a job description. He should already have that. That may come from HR, it may not, and a few other things. But the next step, and the more important, I won't say it's the more important step, but a co-equal step, is probably a better way to say it, is to orient the person to his or her job and department. So once the HR folks are finished with their part of orientation, tell about the company and getting the paperwork filled out, etc., a seasoned employee from the department should come down to HR and get the person and take him or her to the workstation, show them where they are, et cetera, and then do a lot of things. Meet with the supervisor if that's necessary, whatever. Stages an effective employee orientation, according to Stewart and Brown, for providing realistic information about the organization, how the employee fits in. Now, this can be done in two phases. At the initial orientation with HR, and then with the personal and the department orientation, the workstation orientation. How the employee fits in. I have said before many times, I don't know if I've said it in this course, but if you take other courses with me talking about this, you'll hear me say this. Every employee needs to know how he or she fits into the organization's overall scheme and understand how they support the organization's mission, goals, and objectives. That goes all the way down to the least employee that you have, or what you consider the least employee you have, in order of importance, as everybody's important. You may say, well, the janitor's only takes out the trash, but yeah, he or she does that, and they're helping. When people come in, they can see a neat place and it's not disoriented, not stuff strewn all over the place, etc. That's supporting mission. Offer support and assistance to relieve the new employee's jitters, because he or she's going to have them regardless of their age, their education, and their previous work experience. And then, as we mentioned before, have the new employer supervisor and other folks come down and greet them, and then get them to the new workstation and get them oriented there on the job. Promotions. This is another type of personnel action, has a huge effect on staffing. Promotions are a time for joy, at least for one employee, and it can be a major disappointment for those who are not selected. To ensure everyone understands who got promoted and why, HR must develop clear promotion criteria. Now, why HR when it's probably going to come from the supervisor or manager? There have to be criteria set up, and every promotion, regardless of department, has to follow that criteria. When it doesn't, then they're suspicious. They're subjective to derision and second guessing and a few other type things. Promotions should be based on demonstrated potential to handle the next higher level of responsibility, not based on how well you do your current job. Now, is it important that you do your current job well? Absolutely. I will not dismiss that. But simply because you do your current job well does not mean that you have the potential to be promoted to the next higher level of responsibility. And that's critical. So yes, there are two phases to this. The person does his or her job well, or technically proficient and all the rest of that, but they've also demonstrated potential to handle the next higher level of responsibility. Text points out that promotions may be harder to come by in the future as a result of outsourcing and larger numbers of people in the workforce scrambling for upward mobility. The authors mentioned that this may be a serious problem for white males. I don't think so. I don't agree with that. I think it's going to become a more serious problem for white males because white males aren't going to be the majority in the workforce in a short period of time. In a short period of time, we realize that, well, I may be talking 10 or 20 years, but they're not going to be. The white people are no longer going to be the majority in the United States. So it stands to reason that they won't be the majority in the workforce. Yeah, they'll be the largest segment of the population, but they won't be over 50%. Regardless of the circumstances that may force this situation, HR folks have to be prepared by having senior management buy into two personnel enhancement programs. One emphasizes continuing education, enhanced job learning and opportunities, and growth. And then here, promotion may not be an opportunity, but perhaps job levels can be created to provide additional responsibilities along with salary increases. And people want to have responsibility. They want to take it on. If they are in position and have the requisite skills and education, etc., then we need to do something for them. And when we don't do something for them, they're going to become disgruntled. And I don't mean to say they're going to become devious or problem employees, but they're going to become disgruntled. They're going to look to go other places. They may work to the rule. What do I mean by that? Well, they work from 9 to 5. And so when 5 o'clock comes, they're going to leave. They're not going to do any extra work. Now, sometimes it may sound funny because a lot of these people I'm talking about are salaried employees. They're paid regardless of the number of hours they work. They don't punch a time clock or sign a timesheet. But that happens. Transfers. That's exactly what it says. It's not an demotion. It's not a promotion. Purpose here is to help the employee. The major purpose is to help the employee develop new skills and perhaps new knowledge. And this can be viewed as a training opportunity that is beneficial to both the employee and to the organization. Of course, transfers can be caused by layoffs, by downsizing, outsourcing, etc. In these cases, the organization is trying to hold on to a valuable employee. An employee may ask for a transfer. Transfer may be used because of friction within a particular department. Of course, those things are all possible. An employee may be transferred because he or she is not able to be promoted for various reasons within the current department. So we have to make sure why we're transferring people within the organization, and then assure that we're doing it in a proper way. Transfers should not ever be looked upon as punitive. I had a case of that when I was in the Army. Somebody came in looking for somebody, so where's the person that belonged to me? We transferred a personnel folks. We transferred him to some despicable job. Now that's my term. And I said, well, what'd you do that for? First of all, he's not qualified to do that. And second, you're just going to make him worse than what he already is. Well, I got some mumbo jumbo answer. Now I was able to eventually fix that. But we have to be careful about that. We don't transfer people for punitive reasons. If they don't know how to do something, we transfer them. We tell them, we need you to get this particular training. That's why you're being transferred. Transfers should never, ever be used as punitive. Demotions. Boy, this is a hard one. There's no easy way out of this. How do we demote somebody and be cheerful about it? Well, we can't be cheerful. How's that person going to take it? It usually happens because of poor performance. It could happen because of downsizing, layoffs, or outsourcing. And then if we're keeping that person and he or she is demoted, that person has to see that as his job in some respects, or his employment in some respects was being kept by the organization because they felt that he was a relative or she was a relatively decent employee. But otherwise, that demotion is not going to be very good. If demotion is considered because the employee was promoted beyond his or her ability, then it's management's fault. It is not the employee's fault, and it can never be considered the employee's fault. Now you have a tricky thing to walk back here and say, well, look here, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have promoted you in the first place. That's really difficult to do. So you may want to say something that, the promotion is contingent on satisfactory performance in 30, 60, 90 days. I don't know how legal that is, but you need to talk to your folks about that, whether it's legal or not, but you may want to consider that. Man, if you demote somebody because he or she shouldn't have been promoted in the first place, that means you made the error. That person didn't make the error. You made the error. You've got the egg on your face. It's a highly emotional issue and should be done carefully, well considered before it's completed. Correct an error, earlier error in judgment if that's necessary. There should be sound demotion policies, same as there have to be sound promotion policies, and they have to be followed. You can't do this, just say, okay, you're demoted, we're going to bring somebody else up. That doesn't work. A private meeting about demotion has to be not only considered, has to be held. And we again here focus on what the person did, not on the person. Failed to do these tasks, doesn't have the capability, etc. Demotion based on performance should never be a surprise. Employee knows when he or she's not doing well. Employee should have been counseled and given notices of consequences of poor performance. First a verbal, then a written, wherever is necessary. Now we usually think of that only in termination, but it doesn't have to be. Resignations. Companies shouldn't be overly concerned with this type of action unless it appears to be ongoing, starting a trend. Resignation is voluntary. The company should conduct an exit interview to determine why the individual is leaving. Now, understand this. Exit interviews, you don't always get the unvarnished truth, but you have to conduct them anyway because you need to get some nugget of information that you can hang your hat on. The officers present information about exit interviews on page 290. Some employee turnover is considered acceptable, but if you have too much, then you've got a morale problem most likely, or some other issues, because you're now going to have less experienced staff doing things, and that's going to create other problems. The Bureau of National Affairs, which is part of the Department of Labor, publishes a quarterly report on turnover by industry, and companies can use that data as a benchmark to see how well they're performing. Why employees leave an organization is an area of concern. Text lists 10 reasons and what to do about them on table 13.1 on page 298. I'm not going to go through all these, but let's focus on a few of them. Poor supervision. Boy, that says a lot. This may be a #1 concern in companies why people leave. The supervisor just is not good. Now, it could be he or she's not technically proficient. It could be that he or she is a slave driver. It could be he or she doesn't understand how to supervise or manage people. A company should provide training that addresses human relations to sharpen interpersonal skills. Very necessary. If you're familiar with McGregor, he had 2 theories, theory X and theory Y, and some managers go on to theory X that people don't want to be at work. The only way you're going to get them to work is through pay and fear and things of that nature. Well, that's simply not the case in most cases. People like to work, and they don't mind working, but they don't like working for somebody that is treating them as less than a human being. According to John Schimmerhorn and his co-authors, Hunt, Uelby, and Osborne, managers must maintain social capital, which is the ability to accomplish tasks by fostering interpersonal relationships. The supervisors who have poor human social skills need to be replaced. That, by the way, is from Schimmerhorn's Organizational Behavior, 12th edition, published in 2013. Might be 2012. I have to check the reference. Monotonous work can be addressed by using things such as job rotation, job enlargement, and job enrichment. You understand job rotation, moving from place to place within a company. Job enlargement is placing more tasks in the job. You might have 2 tasks that were performed by different people. Now you put the 2 tasks together, performed by one person. And then job enrichment is actually a form, at least to me, of employee empowerment, where the characteristics of that are task identity, skill variety, autonomy, feedback, and things of that nature that the employee really is able to take hold of the job and do it himself. Nichols, McHugh, and McHugh say that job enrichment is a motivational tool by providing the employee with a greater challenge. Just as what I've talked about. Employers responsible for planning and evaluation duties formerly performed by the supervisor. And many times the supervisor has a little problem because now he or she is not directly involved in what the employee is doing. So that's something you want to do. By the way, that comes from Nichols, McHugh, and McHugh, Understanding Business, 10th edition, published in 2013. Poor morale. I don't have to say much about poor morale. Again, this can come from the routine, mundane jobs. Training and development initiatives ought to be around to help get people going. Supervisors, managers need to stay attuned to interactions with workers, find out different things, hold sensing sessions, etc. There are other reasons that are important as well, including inadequate compensation, lack of promotion opportunities, and other personnel issues. those need to be addressed on a company-wide basis, whereas the resignation issues mentioned above can be addressed very easily at the department level, because usually they're going to know. Now, if the employee says, I don't like the company's policies, well, yeah, then they've got to go down and get the company to do something different about it. But, if it's work, if it's really related to the work, then the supervisor manager has the opportunity to directly affect how that's done. Terminations and reasons for terminations must be documented. That's to help in case of legal people coming back and saying there was unlawful termination here. So you need to say why it is. They must be handled in private. There should be a witness to the exit conversation. That's a term I want to use. And the conversation needs to focus on performance and the reason the employee was terminated. Could be performance, could be devious actions, it could be counterproductive behavior, etc. But focus on that. Then complete your end of the discussion. Give the employee a chance to respond. Have him or her escorted back to the workplace to turn in all the pertinent information that he has to do, get passwords, etc. for the PC, and then have the employee escorted off the premises. Small companies don't have that capability for the most part, so they have to figure out how to handle this. It's best to terminate an employee early in the week and don't do it on Fridays. Of course, that may not be possible given something comes up right away. But do make every attempt to soften the blow as much as possible. Although I would tell you, this is another incident where a person should not be surprised at being terminated. He or she has to understand it's coming. Poor performance or doing things they shouldn't be doing, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, during that exit interview, you want to discuss severance pay and any continuing benefits that may come along. Retirement planning. This is something that companies really need to pay attention to, especially as a good-sized segment of our workforce is aging. Baby boomers, as you well know, are at age 65. They started in 1946, so they're past age 65. Some of them are still in the workforce, and they want to continue working. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that as long as they're productive. And some of them are working part-time, et cetera. And so we need to do that. But retirement planning has to be considered because an employee gets to that stage. And in the old days, he or she would be given a luncheon and a gold watch and patted on the back and told about retirement benefits and come back and see you sometime. Well, things are different today. And most employees, and even in those days, most employees don't plan for retirement. They don't know what they're going to do, not so much tomorrow or the day after, because they probably have plans to sleep in late, and do some reading or catch up on something that they want to do. But after a couple of weeks, or perhaps after a month, they're not going to know what they want to do. And so this is where it has to be talked to the employee, and he or she has to know what benefits they have coming to them. The company has a retirement plan, regardless whether it's defined benefit or defined contribution. We need to talk to them about Social Security and Medicare and things of those nature, and what they're maybe if they can stay on the on the employer's health plan and what it's going to cost them to do that, and things of that nature. So all of those things have to be discussed. It can be done in classroom environments. It can be done one-on-one. But the retired worker needs as much information as possible. And perhaps he or she needs emotional assistance as well. It's a very traumatic experience to leave something. I know somebody would say to me, well, was it a traumatic experience for you to leave the Army? And after all the years I spent in it, and I would tell you, it probably wasn't. Because I had been thinking about what I wanted to do, and my wife wanted to move back to this area where we're from, and which was okay with me. And so we had some kind of idea and things of that nature. So I probably had a little bit better thought process about what I was going to do than maybe the normal person does. I knew I was going to be leaving. I'd been on the retirement list for a year, or, orders were published. That's how the Army does that thing. So I was making some plans and doing some things. Didn't necessarily go the way I expected them to go when I returned here, but I had some kind of a plan. I knew kind of what I wanted to do, and so the transition was probably a little bit easier for me, maybe than it would be for someone else. So that's why I'm saying that we need to think about these things and provide that support, because after all, that person was a valued employee, and we don't want to see them just thrown out in the cold. References, we talked about this before. Companies should have a policy and everybody should know it, especially managers. We know that companies refuse to do certain things, etc. A company may choose a no reference policy or have one in which they'll release all information after obtaining a signed consent release form. That's fine. Final topic that the authors talk about is outsourcing. Very contentious issue here in the United States, because most of us believe that outsourcing always means moving U.S. manufacturing jobs overseas. Text mentions a number of human resource management jobs that have been outsourced. Many of these, however, remain in the United States. Several years ago, I think I've mentioned this in this class, and maybe I haven't, Procter & Gamble decided it wanted to outsource its information technology because it found that it was not a core competency, something that the organization did not do well. And so they wanted to partner with somebody that did that. So they outsourced to Hewlett-Packard, another American company. And this turned out to be a win-win for everybody, because Hewlett-Packard signed, then Procter & Gamble signed a contract. It was a 10-year contract. Hewlett-Packard was going to take care of the information technology for them. And every employee who worked for Procter & Gamble in its information technology department stayed right where they were and became an employee of Hewlett-Packard. Now, of course, they did half the staff didn't want to, but they had that option, so they weren't moving anywhere. So it was a win-win for both organizations. Advantages of outsourcing include transferring human resource functions to achieve better service, if we're talking about that area, allowing management to focus on its core mission and competencies, can be considered to be cost saving. Now we know that there's disadvantages. It may be more expensive than originally thought. The company needs to reinvestigate that and to make sure it doesn't sign a contract that's going to obligate it for longer periods of time than it wants to be obligated. Employees' perception that management does not care about them. Remember, perceptions are reality and they're difficult to eradicate. And then using multiple vendors, may cause confusion. Human resource managers have to wear many hats for the HR function to function well and address and resolve a variety of issues. It's important that human resource folks be part of strategic planning. They cannot any longer be considered the office that's down the hall and around the corner. They have to be at the big table because it's important. Anything other than that is making a mistake. Human resource managers must take action, but not be reactive in handling personnel issues. And now we'll spend the next 20 or so minutes talking about Chapter 14. This introduces an important but often neglected topic for human resource managers, and that's evaluating how well we do the staffing function. Not something, we humans don't like to do that. We don't like to evaluate anything. I know somebody's going to tell me, no, what we evaluate all the time. It's not human nature to evaluate things that you do. You say, okay, I did it. It's over and done with, and I did it to the best of my ability. Step down, next case. But we really have to do something to evaluate our functions, get some kind of feedback, find out if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, if we say we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and when we find out that we're not, that we're taking corrective action. Now, that's one of the things that accreditors come in when they come into accredit a college after a university after it's a new visit. They want to look at the things that they saw the last time and see that the college or university has taken steps to evaluate that and taken corrective action. And that's what they're interested in. Are you trying to move forward as opposed to staying stuck in the same place that you've been forever and forever? So we know that companies do or should evaluate the training program, but what else needs to be evaluated and by what type of method? Now, we talked about training and development last week. I don't know that we talked about evaluating a training and development program. But if we can go back and look at, we're going to talk about job analysis next week, so I don't want to jump into that. But one of the ways that you do training and development, but particularly training, is the manager will come to somebody in human resources management and say, we need to do some training on X, Y, Z. And so the first thing human resource management should do is conduct a needs analysis, find out what type of training is needed, and to find out what they need to do to either bridge the gap between what is known and what should be known, or if it's new equipment and new training is needed or required, how to get those folks up to speed by designing a training program that gets them there. And so then they do that training program. And then the two things ought to happen after the training is delivered and people go back to the workplace. The HR folks, the trainer, and he or she is actually conducting training. They may bring an expert in to do it. They may have the expertise in house to do the training, but they're conducting the training based upon what the manager requests and the needs assessment, or there should be a needs assessment. Pardon me. Once the training is finished and the people have gone back to the workstation, the training department should do two things, or maybe not the same person who conducted the training, but the training department should do two things. They should go back and ask the supervisor how well the employees are performing now since they have had the training, one. And two, they ought to go back to the employees and say, has the training helped you? Are you able to perform your job better? You feel more comfortable in doing what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And then use that information to develop the next training program, because that information should tell them in some respect how well they did, what the shortfalls were, what needs to be fixed, et cetera, et cetera. Now, yeah, some of it's going to be job specific, so you may not be able to translate that to every piece of training that's conducted in the company, but it gives you a starting point, and that's what we're talking about here in trying to evaluate what we're doing. Now, the staffing function covers the entire gamut of activities for which human resource folks are responsible to both implement and administer. And so they have to have some kind of idea of what they're doing. The first method of evaluation that the authors talk about is a checklist. It's an internal evaluation system, or method if you prefer, that reviews each function performed by human resource management. It is usually set up to answer yes or no, a series of questions as to whether or not the HR department is doing various functions it's charged to do. Obviously, yeses indicate that HR is doing what it's charged to do. So it's important to note that this type of evaluation is not a benchmark. Rather, it's simply an internal report card. Useful way, an easy way to compile data, but it just reports that we're following the organization's HR policies and procedures. Gives no numerical measures, and it simply reports what I said. There are 20 things we're responsible for. We're doing 18 of them, and the other 2 we don't do. Now, there could be good and cogent reasons why we don't do these other 2. We talked about outsourcing before. We've outsourced those. Or those are no longer applicable. We roll them into something else. But it doesn't tell us anything. It just said, yeah, we're doing this, or no, we're not doing this. That's it. There's no measurement. There's no numerical data to go to. Anybody comes in and asks for the checklist, it's just going to see a bunch of check marks or X's or whatever it happens to be. And then somebody who's my term here, who's a tallier, will come in and tally the numbers, which is pretty easy to do. And he'll say to the HR guy or gal, the chief, we're doing 95% of what we claim we're doing. And so the HR chief can go up and sit with the big boys and big girls in the corner office and say, hey, we're doing 95% of what we claim we're going to do. And everybody applauds and goes on to the next thing. But it didn't tell us anything. It didn't tell us anything other than, yeah, we're doing 95% of what we claim we're going to do. Doesn't tell us how well. Doesn't tell us we need to fix anything. Doesn't tell us we need to look someplace else. It just says, here's our numerical number. Well, remember, so that doesn't give numerical measure, but here's our numerical number. Numerical number is 95%. But what does it mean? Nothing. Now, yeah, somebody's going to say, well, 95 means more than 94 and less than 96. And on a scale of 1 to 100, it's pretty good. That's an A. Yeah, well, what does that A mean? It doesn't mean anything. It just means we're doing these things. And by the way, we're charged to do these things, so we're doing them. And somebody may ask, why are we doing that one thing? And like I said before, maybe we changed procedures, and maybe we've outsourced that. Maybe it's no longer applicable. All we're saying, yeah, we do this. Step down, next case. Nothing more, no evaluation, nothing. The second method adopts a quantitative measure or measures. It can use statistical measures. If this is the choice, an expert in statistical analysis should help develop the measurement tools so that adequate evaluation can be rendered and someone can make sense of the statistical data that's collected. Now, I like to stop here just a second and talk about statistics. There's a philosophy that says there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there's statistics. A little bit of a humor there, and I'm not trying to put anybody who's a statistician down. The problem with doing this is that statisticians always have some kind of an idea of what's being measured, but the data doesn't come out so the everyday person understands what the statistics mean. So that's an imperative. That has to be articulated. And that's something that we really don't talk about here, pardon me, in this method, but I wanted to stop and talk about it because it's very important. An alternative is using mathematical formulae. Again, you'd have to get somebody who understands mathematical formulae. This can be simple ratios, and it assists the HR department in compiling meaningful data that may be used for both internal and external reports. This method is another type of an internal evaluation. Method is an improvement over the checklist scenario in that now we have either statistical measures or numerical data to report. It paints a better picture of what we're doing, and it tells us in a clearer way how we are able to evaluate our staffing functions. Now, we have to remember, again, this is internal. And the first one was internal, and we decided, or at least I decided, it wasn't very useful because it's just a series of check marks. Just says we're doing this, we're not doing that. Doesn't tell us how well. And that's something we really need to know in many cases. I think there's two levels, pardon me, I think there's two levels of evaluation here, regardless of the method we choose, except to say we don't want to use the benchmark, the checklist. And that is, we have to evaluate whether or not we're doing these things that we claim we're doing. So it gives us some kind of a numerical data, hopefully. And then there should be some measure of how well we're doing it. So I see this evaluation as two-pronged. Yes, we're doing these things, and then two, how well we're doing it. The final method, according to the authors, is what is known as benchmarking the data that we collect against an external company or companies, preferably in our field, but if not in our field, against another organization who is known to have superior HR functions and does a good job of evaluating what they do. Pardon me. Now, we may have heard this by going to conferences or workshops and get some kind of an idea from that. Since we're talking about human resources, we may be able to go to SHRM, as the Society for Human Resource Management, and ask them if they can help us with some external evaluation. It tells the company we can benchmark against, or perhaps we can benchmark against something that they provide, or we can send them what we're doing, perhaps our numerical data, and ask them to do some extrapolation for that, etc. This is, as the authors point out, the newest method, and the organization may choose a competitor or other entity to use as its benchmark. That's what I said. I said a little bit differently, just giving it to you. That's pretty much out of what the text has to say. Usually companies choose the outstanding organization within its industry as a benchmark. And that usually is probably a pretty good way to do it, because if the organization is in the same industry, it should encounter similar type of issues, similar type personnel issues, similar type employment issues. And so since it should, the benchmark may give us a truer indication of how well we're doing. Two obvious uses for benchmarking are in absentee and turnover rates. And companies can benchmark that. You don't have to go to another company here. You can benchmark your data against that data is compiled by the Bureau of National Affairs within the Department of Labor, which provides industry-wide data. So here, you're going to be able to benchmark against the industry for these two things, absenteeism and turnover. And you won't have to go out to another company and say, I want to, try to benchmark against somebody else. This is going to give you industry-wide information, and you're going to be able to understand immediately how well you stack up without going to anybody else. That data is printed. It's probably online today, and it's accessible by anybody. So I don't know, it may be a controlled site. You may have to log in, have password, and those kinds of things. But that information is public information. And so you don't have to worry about, well, if a company I'm benchmarking against, so that everything they're doing accurate. Now, it probably is if you're benchmarking against them, and they're known as an industry leader, and you're not going to run into those situations. But it's always possible that you might. Benchmarking is viewed as the superior evaluation, but as usual, it comes with advantages and disadvantages. Advantages include it uses quantifiable data which senior management can readily understand. And senior management always wants to beat its competitors, whether we're talking about product, price, delivery, customer satisfaction, or how well we treat our employees. HR stuff. Uses the industry leader as the comparable other. The industry leader is usually acknowledged by everyone within the industry as the leader. We aspire to be like that company. Can provide a clearer picture of costs. And finally, is a motivator for the HR folks to improve and excel in their staffing activities. Disadvantages, it is difficult to obtain reliable results. The organization must be compared to many others. Difficult to obtain reliable data, so the company has to compare itself to many others and just not the person, or not just the company it wants to benchmark against. Cost to undertake this method of evaluation may be prohibitive. The amount of time needed to obtain good comparative data may be beyond the scope of the HR department. May not be staffed to do that, may not have the people who are able to quantify the data and putting it into a meaningful report that everybody can understand, etc. Regardless of the evaluation method selected, it is imperative that HR have a report card ready at all times. Now, we've said that the checklist is probably not preferable, but what you could do, and I think would be a very good way to do this, is to do the checklist and then get into this comparative data analysis, where you would have a statistician or someone with a mathematical background help you build formulae, etc. And then help make sense of the formulae and put it into a reasonable and understandable report. The reason is that many organizations view HR functions as a cost center and not as a profit center. In other words, HR costs us money, doesn't put a dollar in our till. And I'm here to tell you folks that it's HR's responsibility to recruit and select, and they do put dollars in the till. Because if they don't recruit the right people and they don't select the right people, the company's not going to be able to perform its mission. That is, senior management does not understand HR's value. And often HR does a very poor job of articulating its importance to the organization's success. It is imperative that HR function both effectively and efficiently. The staffing functions for which HR is responsible are the lifeblood of the organization. A little bit differently than what I said before. They find the employees, they make sure that they meet whatever is to be met, and they put them to work. Organizational success depends upon having the right employees in the right place at the right time. And HR must have a contingency plan to assure any employment changes can be met. And it helps doing that by going through some type of evaluation of the staffing duties that it does, that it performs, and make sure that it does them well. So I thank you for your attention tonight. I will have the lecture recorded here in just a few minutes and have it uploaded for you tomorrow and send you the information where it can be found on the campus web within the course. And also we'll send you a YouTube link as soon as I find it. So I thank you very much for your attention. I wish each of you a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you, and we'll see you again next week. Next week will be on Wednesday, December 3rd. Thank you and good night.